Greetings, Swamp Foxes. This is Troy Newham, author of 2084, The Search for Love, Hope, and Faith, available on Amazon.com in Kindle and paperback version. And this week's message from Moses is going to be about religious freedom versus the rights of the child, as it were. And here again we have another case where parents, unfortunately, let their child die from pneumonia. Actually, this is the second time it's happened. Maybe they need a better roof over their head. Letting the kids play out in the rain might be a good thing. But rather than seek medical attention, they opted to pray over them and watch them die. And they are being brought up, or they are considering filing murder charges against them because they killed their child by not getting them to go to the hospital. Alright. No, you can't do this. It's religious freedom. This is their religion. Now, some idiot out there wants to say, well, what about someone who reads the Bible and takes the verse, the first child shall walk in darkness, or some stupid thing, and blinds their child by stabbing their eyes out with a dagger. Well, no, that's like one crazy person doing something crazy. For starters, you can't do that because it's a crazy person. That's not a religion. That's just one crazy person. There's a difference. Now, unless you are totally anti-religion, then you're like, oh, you crazy people over there. But, let's not talk about that. Alright, so then, the question is what if your religious beliefs actually do harm to another person? Well, you can't do that because the Constitution protects everybody's rights. Okay? No one has a right, if I'm sick, if I'm coughing up blood and I got pneumonia, no one has a right to say, Troy David Newham, you are going to the hospital and drag me there. I know a few people who would try, but you can't make me. Okay? Well, it might not be my beliefs. Maybe I don't want to pay for it. Maybe I'm sick alive and I don't want to die. But the thing is that's my right. Now, if I can make that choice, you can make that choice for your kids as well. There's nothing in there that says you have to do it. Now, if you're withholding medical attention to be cruel because you don't like your kid to punish them or some really stupid thing, that's different. But if you're holding it because it's a religious belief, that's your religion. And, you might not like it. You might feel sick to your stomach that some kid's going to die for it, but you ain't got a say in it. And you don't have to live with the memory of that kid. God spoke to Abraham and made him take Isaac up on the mountain. He was going to kill him. Who's to say that this isn't God asking for a sacrifice? Say, well, this is your test of your faith. Do you believe in me? Do you really believe? Or is it something that's wishy-washy? Because, if you say you have freedom of religion unless it offends my sensibilities, what you're really saying is God doesn't really exist. He's a figment of your imagination. He's this fictional character that you've made to help you get through life, and that's all well and good until he requires you to do something that I happen to disapprove of. And this is the crux of freedom of religion. And, they might be right. Let's assume for a second, just 1 second, that this crazy people who believe in faith healing, whatever their Christian subset is, but let's say that they are right. And you get there and you're like, oh crap, by getting vaccinations and getting treated by pneumonia, I'm doomed to hell. Crap! No, I wish I'd listened to those faith healers. They were right on the money. And that's the problem, isn't it? Because you don't know. Every religion could technically be right. Now, I find an interesting subset of this is, what if a religion happens to say, well, you can smoke marijuana? This has always been kind of the crux. There's actually been many attempts to start religions around this because Native Americans, of course, can smoke peyote. Of course, on an Indian reservation, you can do whatever, that particular tribe wants to let you do. So, there's that. But there's been cases where people have tried to do that. And one, as a libertarian, I really don't care if that's what you want to do. You can make that argument. But there's a difference when you have an activity which could be considered pleasurable by some, and you happen to all of a sudden start up a religion that will allow you to do that versus a religion that says, here are laws, here are restrictions. You have to accept these miseries of life for eternal salvation versus, let's party, let's smoke some pot, let's smoke some pot. You see, there's a big difference between those two. And basically, the difference between the freedom of religion from this one and this one is I kind of assume that this guy over here is lying just because he wants to smoke some pot. Whereas this guy over here really believes that that's God's will and he's willing to make those sacrifices because of what he believes in. There's a difference between, you know, enjoyment and pain. Between, you know, taking pleasure out of life and refraining from pleasure. And that's what it is. But I don't believe they should be tried for murder. I don't even think they should be punished. This is what they believe in. It's a recognized religion with religious laws and religious tenements. And then if you start letting the government say, okay, well, you can do this, but you can't do that, and you can't do this, and you can't do this, it must have stopped them from doing. Matter of fact, they're starting talks about homeschooling. Say, okay, well, you can't teach your kids that global warming is a myth. You can't teach them that hard work will get you ahead. You can't teach them that everyone should be judged strictly on their merits and that everyone's place in life they have earned by how hard they have actually worked. No, you can't teach all that. That's totally inconvenient. You can't teach that capitalism is much more superior to socialism. You can't teach them this. You can't teach them that. And that's where we're headed. They're taking away kids for more and more things. And you know, you just can't. You know, you cannot physically deform your child. You cannot abuse them. You can't cut off their genitalia or anything like that. That is against the law, and such arguments when talking about religious freedom are null and void and absolutely retarded. You know, when you talk about an illness, when you talk about medicines and things like this, you know, there is such a thing as God's will. And if you accept God's will and you say, well, if God wants me to die, then he wants me to die. If God wants me to live, he'll let me live. There's something to be said for that. Do you think we'd have the, you know, overpopulation thing right now if we didn't come up with the smallpox vaccine back then and infect the whole world with the smallpox vaccine? That's a weird thing to say, infect the world with the vaccine. But you know, say what you will about smallpox, it was bloody good at keeping the population down. So, you know, we keep doing this and doing that, and now people are starving to death. And how is that any different? All you did was trade one mass killer for another mass killer. You know, God's will. It's tricky, it's sometimes inconvenient, and oftentimes tragic. But if you believe in it, yeah, there is something very liberating about saying, well, it's God's will. Anyway, that was a long and confusing little rant about religious freedoms and why we shouldn't force people to get medical treatment. Oh, and by the way, who's going to pay for these medical treatments? In one case, you know, they had a kid that had cancer. It's going to cost 6 figures. Hell, that family probably can't pay 6 figures. It might not be that they hate their kid. It might not even be, you know, because of this, or it might be just flat they can't afford it, you know, and they say, well, can't afford it. You know, we got 2 other kids we have to pay for. We can't go 6 figures in debt. You know, regretfully, that's the way that works. Cold-heartedly, that's the way that works sometimes. But if you say you have to get them medical treatment, and they turn around and say, well, are you willing to pay for it for me? What's your answer? Well, no, it's your kid. You should be the one that goes into debt. that life's only important to me if I can force you to take care of it. And then, anyway, 28 Search for Love, Hope, and Faith, available on Amazon.com, and I'm crazy. And 2, War Journal, also available on Amazon.com. Great story about revenge and whatnot. And as always, long live the Constitution, and signing off.